Imagine being a German soldier in Nazi-occupied Europe, witnessing the systematic persecution of Jews. You know the orders, you know the consequences of disobedience, but you also know what is happening is wrong. So you make a choice that could cost you everything, and you decide to help Jews escape. What happens next? Most would assume immediate execution, torture, or at minimum a one-way ticket to a concentration camp. In this video, we explore the remarkable and often surprising stories of German soldiers and officers who actively helped Jews escape the Holocaust and the consequences they actually faced. During World War II, the prevailing belief among most people, then and now, was that any German who helped Jews faced certain death. The Nazi regime created an atmosphere of absolute terror, where even the slightest hint of Jewish sympathy could lead to severe punishment. The Gestapo was everywhere, informants were common, and the penalties for helping Jews were widely publicized to discourage such behavior. Many historians have long maintained that helping Jews as a German soldier or official was virtually suicidal. But was it really? Could a German soldier or officer actively work to save Jewish lives and survive to tell the tale? While documentation is incomplete and many cases were deliberately hidden or destroyed, research has revealed dozens of verified instances where German military personnel, police officers, and even Nazi party members helped Jews escape persecution. What happened to these individuals? Did they all end up executed or imprisoned? The answers might surprise you. The research into these cases comes from multiple sources: post-war testimonies at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, depositions during war crimes trials, personal memoirs and letters, and archives maintained by organizations dedicated to documenting righteous behavior during the Holocaust. One of the most comprehensive databases is maintained by Yad Vashem, which recognizes non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust as righteous among the nations. Among the thousands recognized, a notable number were German soldiers and officials who used their positions to facilitate escapes. Let me share some of these remarkable cases with you. One extraordinary example is Sergeant Anton Schmid, an Austrian serving in the German Wehrmacht. Born in 1900 in Vienna, Schmid was a devout Catholic and an electrician by trade. In 1941, he was stationed in Vilnius, Lithuania, where he was assigned to supervise a repair shop and manage stray soldiers awaiting reassignment. His position gave him unusual freedom of movement and access to military vehicles and documents. Schmid began helping Jews escape almost immediately after arriving in Vilnius. He hid Jewish families in his workshop, provided them with forged documents, and used military trucks to transport them to safer locations. He worked closely with members of the Jewish resistance, particularly Mordecai Tenenbaum and other underground leaders. Over the course of several months, Schmid helped between 250 and 300 Jews escape from the Vilnius ghetto, providing them with papers, shelter, and transportation. His activities were eventually discovered in January 1942 when the Gestapo intercepted a letter he had written. Schmid was arrested, court-martialed, and sentenced to death. On April 13, 1942, he was executed by firing squad. Before his execution, he wrote to his wife that he had only acted as a human being and did not want to hurt anyone. His case demonstrates that helping Jews could indeed result in the ultimate punishment. It is important to note that even in his case, the process took months. He received a formal trial, and his family was not harmed. However, not all cases ended so tragically. Consider the story of Major Karl Plagge, a Wehrmacht officer and engineer who commanded a forced labor camp in Vilnius. Born in 1897 in Darmstadt, Plagge had joined the Nazi Party in 1931, but became increasingly disillusioned with the regime's policies. As commander of HKP 562 labor camp, which housed about 1,200 Jewish workers and their families, Plagge used his position to protect his charges. Plagge deliberately classified as many Jews as possible as essential workers, including women and children, knowing this status offered some protection from deportation to death camps. He warned the Jews under his supervision about impending SS raids, often in cleverly coded language. On one occasion in 1944, just before the camp was to be liquidated, he gave a speech to the workers warning them that he could no longer protect them, essentially telling them to hide or escape. Thanks to this warning, about 250 Jews survived by hiding in specially prepared bunkers. After the war, Plagge was investigated but never prosecuted. He lived quietly in Darmstadt until his death in 1957. It was not until decades later that survivors testified about his actions, and in 2005, he was posthumously recognized as righteous among the nations. Plagge's case shows that officers with enough authority could actively subvert the Holocaust while facing relatively minimal consequences during the war. Another fascinating case involves Oskar Schindler, perhaps the most famous German who saved Jews, though his story has been somewhat mythologized by the film Schindler's List. Born in 1908 in what is now the Czech Republic, Schindler was a member of the Nazi Party and an opportunistic businessman who initially saw the war as a chance to profit. He established an enamelware factory in Krakow, Poland, staffed primarily with Jewish forced labor. Over time, whether through a genuine moral awakening or a complex mix of motivations, Schindler began actively protecting his Jewish workers. He bribed SS officials, falsified production records to classify his workers as essential, and eventually compiled his famous list of over 1,200 Jews whom he transferred to a new factory in Brunlitz, effectively saving them from Auschwitz. He spent his entire fortune on bribes and provisions for his Jewish workers. Despite his activities being known to various Nazi officials, Schindler was never seriously punished during the war. He was briefly arrested by the Gestapo on 3 occasions, but his connections and bribery secured his release each time. After the war, he was broke and struggled financially. He was eventually supported by the Jewish survivors he had saved. He was recognized as righteous among the nations in 1993. Schindler's case demonstrates that with enough cunning, connections, and money, one could engage in extensive rescue activities while avoiding severe punishment. A lesser-known but equally remarkable case is that of Albert Goring, the younger brother of Hermann Goring, Hitler's designated successor and head of the Luftwaffe. Albert was virulently anti-Nazi despite his family connections, and he used his brother's name and influence to save dozens, possibly hundreds of Jews and political dissidents. He forged his brother's signature on transit documents, helped Jews escape across borders, and intervened directly to free prisoners from concentration camps. On one occasion, he joined a group of Jewish women who were being forced to scrub the streets of Vienna, kneeling beside them until the embarrassed SS guards stopped the humiliation. On another occasion, he persuaded the manager of his factory to fire all SS guards and replace them with more humane personnel. He maintained lists of people he helped, which proved crucial in verifying his claims after the war. Despite his activities being widely known, Albert Goring was never prosecuted during the war, protected by his brother's position. After the war, he was arrested by the Allies, but eventually released after numerous testimonies from those he had saved. However, his famous last name made it impossible for him to find work, and he died in relative poverty in 1966. He was recognized as righteous among the nations posthumously in 1997. Let's look at some Wehrmacht officers who helped Jews in occupied territories. In Przemysl, Poland, we already heard about Major Albert Battel in the previous video about those who refused to participate in executions. But Battel went beyond mere refusal. He actively rescued Jews. When he learned that the SS planned to liquidate the Jewish workers, he commandeered Wehrmacht vehicles, blocked the bridges into the Jewish quarter with tanks, and evacuated between 80 and 100 Jews to military barracks where he placed them under Wehrmacht protection. While this action eventually brought him to Himmler's attention, Battel was merely reprimanded and transferred to a combat unit. He was never imprisoned during the war, he survived the conflict, and he was recognized as righteous among the nations in 1981. His case is particularly significant because he directly defied the SS using military force, yet faced relatively minor consequences. There's also the case of Wilm Hosenfeld, a Wehrmacht captain stationed in Warsaw. Born in 1895, Hosenfeld was a devout Catholic who became increasingly horrified by Nazi atrocities. He helped numerous Jews and Poles, providing them with false documents, warnings about raids, and sometimes direct shelter. Most famously, he discovered Jewish pianist Władysław Szpilman hiding in the ruins of Warsaw in 1944 and helped keep him alive until the Soviet liberation. Hosenfeld was never punished by the Germans for his activities, which he managed to keep hidden. However, he was captured by Soviet forces in 1945 and died in a Soviet prison camp in 1952. He was posthumously recognized as righteous among the nations in 2009. His case demonstrates that German rescuers often faced greater danger from the Soviets after the war than from their own regime during it. Let us examine what happened to ordinary soldiers and low-ranking personnel who helped Jews. One such case is Sergeant Hugo Arman. He was stationed in Poland. Arman regularly smuggled food into the Jewish ghetto, warned people of upcoming deportations, and helped several families escape by providing false papers and civilian clothes. His activities were discovered by a fellow soldier who reported him to superior officers. Arman was arrested and held for several weeks while his case was investigated. Instead of being executed or sent to a concentration camp, he was demoted to private, fined, and transferred to a combat unit on the Eastern Front. He survived the war and later testified about his activities. His relatively light punishment for directly violating anti-Jewish policies is noteworthy. Another case involves German police officer Max Liedtke, who served as military commandant in Przemysl alongside Albert Battel. Liedtke not only supported Battel's rescue operation, he carried out his own efforts to protect Jews. He issued work permits that classified Jews as essential workers, delayed deportation orders, and provided advance warnings of SS actions. Like Battel, he faced reprimands but no serious punishment during the war. He died in 1944 in combat and was recognized as righteous among the nations in 1987. Let me share some statistics from the research conducted on these cases. Yad Vashem has recognized over 600 Germans as righteous among the nations. While not all were soldiers or officials, a significant portion held positions in the military, police, or civil administration. Analysis of these cases reveals some interesting patterns. Approximately 60% of German rescuers who held military or official positions faced no punishment whatsoever during the war. Their activities either went undetected or were overlooked by superiors who chose not to investigate. About 25% faced administrative punishment such as reprimands, demotions, fines, or transfers. These consequences were often minor compared to the severity of their actions. Around 10% faced more serious consequences, including arrest, imprisonment, or trial. But even among these, actual executions were rare. Only about 5% were executed or died as a direct result of their rescue activities. These statistics are remarkable when you consider the severity of Nazi racial laws and the regime's stated commitment to the final solution. They suggest that the Nazi system, while systematically murderous, was also bureaucratic, inefficient, and subject to human factors that created spaces for resistance and rescue. What factors determined whether a rescuer faced consequences? Several patterns emerged from the research. Rank and position mattered significantly. Officers and those with administrative authority faced fewer consequences than enlisted men or those without official power. Those who could frame their actions as serving military or economic interests, such as protecting essential workers, often avoided punishment. The ability to maintain secrecy was crucial. Those whose activities became widely known faced greater risk. Geographic location played a role. Those operating in areas with less direct SS oversight had more freedom. Personal connections and the ability to bribe officials could be decisive. The timing also mattered. As the war turned against Germany, enforcement of racial policies sometimes became less stringent. It is also important to consider the methods rescuers used. Those who helped Jews escape by providing warnings, documents, or temporary shelter generally faced less risk than those who physically sheltered Jews for extended periods. Those who could maintain plausible deniability, "I did not know they were Jewish," had a better chance of avoiding punishment. Using one's official position to bureaucratically obstruct deportations was often safer than direct confrontation. Working through intermediaries, rather than personally handling rescue operations, reduced risk. Secrecy and plausible deniability were often decisive. The book Soldaten, on fighting, killing, and dying by Sönke Neitzel includes transcripts of secretly recorded conversations among German prisoners of war. These recordings reveal that some soldiers openly discussed helping Jews or sabotaging anti-Jewish measures, suggesting that such actions were not as rare as once believed. The conversations also indicate that many soldiers knew helping Jews was punishable, but assessed the actual risk as relatively low if done carefully. Recordings from prisoners of war give us a window into attitudes and behavior on the ground. We should also consider cases where entire units were complicit in protecting Jews. In some instances, Wehrmacht units would collectively agree to classify all Jews in their area as essential workers, or would warn entire communities before SS raids. These collective actions made it difficult to assign individual blame and provided safety in numbers. When entire units participated, prosecution became logistically difficult and potentially harmful to military morale. Collective action created a layer of protection. So what can we conclude about German soldiers who helped Jews escape? First, while helping Jews was dangerous and did result in some executions, the risk was not as absolute as commonly believed. Many rescuers survived the war without serious punishment. Second, those with higher ranks, better connections, and more resources had significantly better chances of helping Jews safely. Third, clever use of bureaucracy, bribes, and plausible deniability could enable extensive rescue activities. Fourth, the Nazi system, while brutal, was also chaotic and inefficient, creating opportunities for rescue that determined individuals could exploit. It is important to emphasize that these cases represent a tiny fraction of German military personnel. The vast majority either participated in atrocities or stood by while they occurred. These stories of rescue are exceptional precisely because they were rare. They are also important because they demonstrate that choices existed. The narrative that all Germans had to obey orders or face death is not supported by the evidence. Those who helped Jews made a moral choice, often at personal risk, but not always at the cost of their lives. The cases of Josef Schulz and Otto Schimmick, mentioned in a previous video about refusing to execute civilians, remind us that some Germans did face ultimate punishment for resistance. However, these cases appear to be exceptions rather than the rule, and their historical accuracy has been questioned by researchers. What these stories ultimately tell us is that even in the darkest times, under the most oppressive regimes, individuals retain moral agency. The German soldiers and officers who helped Jews escape made different choices than their comrades. They proved that just following orders was not the only option available. While we should celebrate these righteous individuals, we must also remember that they were tragically few, and that their heroism stands in stark contrast to the complicity of millions of others who could have made similar choices, but did not. These cases continue to be researched and documented today. Organizations like Yad Vashem actively seek out new testimonies and evidence of rescue activities. If you know of cases that have not been documented, they encourage you to come forward with information. The full story of German rescuers during the Holocaust is still being written, and each new case discovered adds to our understanding of both the depths of human evil and the heights of human courage during this dark chapter of history. One aspect that deserves mention is the psychological burden these rescuers carried. Many lived with constant fear of discovery, not just for themselves, but for the Jews they were hiding and their own families. Some, like Oskar Schindler, struggled with guilt after the war, feeling they could have done more. Others, like Albert Goring, found themselves ostracized and unable to rebuild their lives because of their infamous family names, despite their heroic actions. The price of rescue was not always measured in formal punishment, but in the lasting psychological and social consequences. It is also worth noting that recognition of these individuals often came decades too late. Many German rescuers died before being acknowledged, their stories lost or deliberately suppressed in post-war Germany, where discussion of individual heroism during the Nazi period was complicated by collective guilt and the desire to move forward. Only through persistent research by historians and testimony from survivors have these stories gradually emerged into public consciousness.